October 29th, 2012, a date which has been indelibly marked on the calendars of all the people of Manasquan. Perhaps future generations will call it Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Sandy, or maybe just the Great Halloween Storm of 2012. A freak of nature, the perfect storm, all the right winds, tides, and other astronomical goblins, all joined together to viciously and wantonly attack our town and our lives. We covered our windows, locked our doors, and some retreated from their homes to more safe locations. When we awoke from our restless and sleepless night, much of Manasquan lay destroyed, and all of Manasquan suffered damage of some degree. Sandy attacked and left a path of destruction as no storm ever did before. The one thing that Sandy could not anticipate when she arrived was the strength of the people of this town. You can knock down our homes. You can fill our homes with seawater. You can take away our belongings. But you could not take away our strength, our faith, and our love. This is the story for the next generation. May they watch this and see what happened, how we prepared, and how we never gave up. In the darkness of October 30th, Mayor George Dempsey perhaps said it best in his radio address to the Borough, not unlike those fireside chats of Franklin Roosevelt during World War II. This is what he said. This is what Mayor George Dempsey said to the people of Manasquan. And this is where we begin.
Good evening. I'm George Dempsey, your mayor of Manasquan. Hurricane Sandy caused devastation of record proportions. I am confident in the resolve and strength of our residents, volunteers, emergency personnel, and staff to pull ourselves together and return to normalcy. That is what makes Manasquan Manasquan.
I got a phone call from Dave. Somebody had mentioned to him that, oh, did you see the storm, which was at the time a tropical wave down in the Gulf. It hadn't even organized into a named storm or a tropical system at that time. But there was some computer projections that put a possibility of a landfall in the northeast of the U.S. The unique thing with this storm is one of the more reliable models that usually is pretty much the most reliable, that 7-day period out, was showing a landfall in the air in the northeast. So that got our attention. We put out a notice to all the governing body as well as our department heads, just to let them know the possibility, let them know we're going to be monitoring the storm.
When we bought this property and built the home here, our children made us promise to them that if there was ever a mandatory evacuation, that we would leave. There was no question about trying to ride out any storms. So we had promised them that we would do that. And the year before, when Hurricane Irene hit, and we did have a mandatory evacuation, our children were calling us saying, "You're going, aren't you?" And yes, we were going. And we did leave, but we were back within 24 hours, and we were very fortunate we didn't have any damage here.
And what happened was the following day, Tuesday, same thing. Get up in the morning, take a look at the computer models, and that same computer model is showing the same exact situation. It's showing basically this tropical wave going up into the upper part of the Gulf, forming into a tropical system, and making its way with a landfall along the New Jersey, New York coast. We're at the point now where we're saying this is a low probability but a very high impact event, because it's not just showing a landfall of a storm, it's showing a landfall of a very severe hurricane hybrid tropical system, and it's showing a landfall direct hit right in our area.
I think that I always believe, if they tell me to evacuate, I have no problem evacuating. I don't want to be the hero staying here. Even though growing up on the beachfront, my mother never evacuated. when we had storms coming, and hurricanes. We often stayed, but as far as this goes, they really sounded like it was different. It was just a little different than any other weather report that I had been used to hearing. So I definitely knew I was going to be evacuating, and had friends in Avon, so knew that I could evacuate and have someplace safe to stay.
The next day, on Wednesday, we're showing the same result on this weather model. We're also starting to see some of the other weather models hint towards this type of landfall. Very, very large wind field and long duration event striking during a lunar tide cycle that is showing spring tides. It's a new moon tide cycle. It's the highest 2 or 3 day period in any given month. So now we're becoming concerned at this point. On Wednesday, we said we're going to set up a mandatory meeting with all department heads to begin our readiness procedures, and we'll do them stepped. We'll begin with the easiest and least costly preparation measures to begin early on Wednesday and Thursday, and if it looks like continued chance of landfall, we would ramp things up very quickly after that.
Well, it was well advertised on the TV. I mean, it was all over the news stations and everything that it was coming up this way. And we just kind of thought back and remembered back into the storm. The last worst one was in '92. The street was full of sand back then, and a lot of the garage doors were blown out. Or we'll take our chances, and because when we built this place, I talked extensively with the insurance company as to what to do's and not do's, and and even though that we knew that there was a evacuation in place, but we just figured we'll take our chances at that point in time.
This is the Thursday morning briefing that this is the first time that we were putting together official briefings. Every morning from Wednesday on, we would meet. It would be the members of the governing body, Mayor George Dempsey, the administrative staff, Joe DiOrio, the borough clerk, as well as all the department heads, police department, DPW, fire, and first aid, and as well as emergency management. Now on Thursday morning, this is the information we had, and I'm going to walk you through it just to give you an idea. This is what's going through our minds at this time. The storm had become a named storm, Hurricane Sandy at this time. It had just crossed the eastern peninsula of Cuba, and it was a Category 2 storm with 105 mile an hour sustained winds. I'll toggle through. These are the official forecast positions from the National Weather Service. They're only running out 5 days at this point. Okay, so it's showing, like we said, coming up along the East Coast, kind of riding the Gulf Stream on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, then on Sunday, heading out east, on Monday east, and then early Tuesday morning, showing the storm right off of our coast. This doesn't look all that threatening, but when we started taking a look at some of the computer models, and this is a composite of all the different computer models mapped on one page, it's showing that after it goes east of the coast, it starts to make a hard left turn into the New York, New Jersey, Mid-Atlantic region. A couple of models were showing landfalls up in Nova Scotia as well. But what we're looking at, just statistically, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 7 models are showing a significant impact event.
So this year when it happened, our children started calling us again, why aren't you out of there? This is going to be so much worse. And actually, I knew that we had a really big storm coming, but I had a lot of other things going on at that time, and I really didn't pay that much attention. But my husband was on top of it, and he kept saying, Mary, this is a whole lot different than Irene, and you need to be thinking about what you want to take, what we need to pack, because we're going to be out of here for a few days, I think.
Okay, this is Friday morning. It's showing the storm A little bit further north, it had disorganized some. It was a minimum hurricane, a Category 1 with 80-mile-an-hour winds, but we knew that that forecast was going to change. This was the first time that the National Hurricane Center actually forecasted a landfall. And you can see this is their official forecast track, and they're showing a mid-Atlantic landfall sometime late Monday, early Tuesday morning. This is when we knew at this point we had to begin preparatory activities, regardless of the cost to the borough, even though we are still looking at the fact that we're about 3 to 4 days out. This is a very serious situation. These are some of the impacts we are looking at. Very large wind field, strong onshore winds beginning on Sunday, peaking on early Tuesday, and then turning offshore. And at this point, we're looking at 60 knots, which is at least 70-mile-an-hour sustained winds for long duration. We briefed everybody that we'd be looking at very high waves beginning on Sunday. Storm surge values 3 to 6 feet, possibly higher depending on track of the storm. And we're looking at a multitude of high tides that would be affected beginning Sunday evening and extending all the way into Tuesday. This is an inundation map that we had displayed for the department heads and the governing body just to let them know the extent of impacts we're expecting from the hurricane. This red shaded area is approximately the area that we were concerned with, and it pretty much includes the entire beachfront and a majority of the rest of the town. There's very, very small areas of the town that actually aren't going to be impacted.
Well, I thought we started to think about the hurricane coming only a day or two before, because we all watched it on TV and hoped it would keep going north and not come in. So only when it really turned west toward us did we begin our preparations. We weren't worried about the house because we knew it was relatively newly built and 9 foot above mean high water, so we were pretty confident that the house would be safe.
Well, what we did do, though, we outside we took all the furniture and put it in the shed out there, and then we took all the plastic garbage cans and locked them in the showers, the outdoor showers that had doors on them. And of course we took our cars and drove the cars uptown, and we actually parked in the halfway up in the parking lot at Algonquin Arts Theater on the west side. So we took care of that.
We were glad we did that because we found that people that parked their cars closer to the plaza actually got flooded, and we were lucky that we had parked high enough up.
Yeah, that was luck.
When you're operating for those long periods, exhaustion sets in, and that can affect decision making and stamina for an event like this. Also, what we talked about is the need for possible evacuations, especially our special needs people in town, people that are elderly, that are on certain medical machines and whatnot that might need extra care to get them out. Main thing we wanted to drive home is the likelihood of power outages, extended power outages, obviously flooding, and with an event like this, we're definitely going to have a debris removal operation going on. Okay, this was on Friday. At this point, what we had done is we directed DPW to make sure that all the vehicles were fueled and ready to respond. We made sure that we had pulled all the loose items and portable municipal property out of harm's way, meaning up on the beachfront, along the inlet. We directed the police, fire, and first aid to make sure that all their staff knew what we were facing, the possible risks that we were facing, make sure their vehicles were fueled and ready to go, and just to make sure all equipment that we'd expect to possibly use was in good operational order and fueled, and everybody had all their preparations at home taken care of so we'd be able to respond to this.
I'll tell you the truth, it was terrifying sitting at his sister's house watching the reports until she lost power also. And just wondering what might be happening down here. It was very, very scary thinking about it. As confident as I felt about everything that we had done for the house, and as much as I was kind of lackadaisical leaving, like, oh, I'm going to go and, you know, we're going to be fine, we'll be back here, everything's going to be okay, I was really rather frightened thinking about it while we were with the sister.
All right, when we met on Saturday morning, this is our Saturday morning briefing. Now, at this point, we're 48 hours out from the event. At this point, once you hit that 48-hour mark, the forecasts are pretty darn close. So we had a highly reliable forecast, and now we can start getting into the nitty-gritty, the details, as far as exactly how high a tides we're looking at, how strong a winds, wave action, etc. This is 8 a.m. Saturday morning. We have, again, a minimal hurricane at this point. It's off of the Georgia-Carolina coast. We move right into the official forecast track, which has now shifted south. Not much, but a little bit. A little further south is showing a Delaware landfall. Very similar to what we had yesterday. But at this point, we knew even with a hit along the Delaware-Maryland coast, we would still, due to the size and scope of this storm, be facing a massive storm and significant flooding and very high winds. Okay, this is the wind speed probabilities. Again, just another tool that we look at. At this point, they were forecasting about a 60 to 70% chance of tropical force winds here in Manasquan, and we put that up just for informational purpose. Next slide we showed was our tide forecast for the storm. Closest 2 points was Atlantic City and Sandy Hook that we use. This is the forecast at Atlantic City. The overall purpose, I'm not going to get into the nuances, but that black line is the forecasted tide height. The green line is the actual lunar tides that just occur from the sun and the moon. And the gold line here is the storm surge, the forecasted surge. And their forecasted surge was about 4.5 feet. Again, because it was such a long duration, it was going to extend over several tide cycles, so there's no way to actually miss that storm surge. Sometimes you have a very quick moving storm. Typically, most tropical storms, when they get up in this area, they are fast moving, and you have a very short peak of storm surge. And if that happens to line up with low tide like it did with Hurricane Gloria, that can attenuate a lot of the effects of the storm surge. But we knew we were dealing with a hybrid storm, long duration, several days, several tide cycles. And what I wanted to stress is right here, the forecasted tide height was around 9 feet. And that was in 1992, which is really one of the storm of records for the town, certainly of recent memory. We wanted to let all the borough officials know that now we're looking at a high probability of us having the same exact type of event as what we had at 92, and possibly worse if that track started to extend instead of a landfall in Maryland or Delaware, but extend to a landfall in southern New Jersey.
I heard the storm was coming, you know, and like you could see it was big. You know, I followed the weather. You could see, you know, the radar, and all that. It was going to be a big storm, you know. And I had the Jet game, and I'm a diehard Jet fan, so I said, well, I'm going to the game. So I went to the game, and I really didn't prepare because the storm wasn't going to be there till Monday. So when we came in Sunday night, I parked, I signed a release, I walked in, you know, and everything was high and dry. The electricity was still on then until Monday when the electricity went out. And then by then, everything was starting to get, there was no one around. It was just like barren.
Our final briefing. This is Sunday morning. So we're about 36 hours out from the peak of the storm. What I did was I just put up, while everybody was filtering into the room in the morning, the coastal flood warning that had come out that morning, because I wanted everybody to read it. It had some verbiage in there that showed how significant this storm was going to be. And again, we wanted to stress to everybody that this is no longer if, it's a matter of when, and we knew it was coming. You can see in here some of the major bullet points to take away. High surf of 15 to 20 feet, driven by frequent gusts of 50 to 60 mile-an-hour winds, is going to exacerbate all the flooding on Monday. A 4 to 8 foot storm surge coinciding with the Monday evening high tide is likely to produce a record flood measured at Sandy Hook, possibly 1 to 2 feet higher than ever recorded since storm tide records began in the 1940s. When you get verbiage like this coming out of the National Weather Service, you know that you have a major high-impact event about to occur. Again, we'll walk through the slides. This is the Sunday morning position. Hurricane hasn't moved much, moved maybe 50, 100 miles. It's a minimal hurricane. So that in itself, you'd look and say, well, this thing's breaking apart. It's not really, it doesn't look too intimidating. But then we look at the National Hurricane Center's forecast map, and we can see that this is the worst case scenario. You're looking at a major hurricane right off of the coast, turning 90 degrees and slamming into the New Jersey shore just south of Manasquan. This is exactly what we did not want to see, and this is the worst case scenario.
We had a number of meetings at the district level and the school level anticipating what we might run into in terms of facilities, in terms of communication, in terms of adjustments that we might have to make even with the school calendar going forward. It was difficult at certain times because leading up to the storm, there were different reports as to how severe it was going to be. So we tried to put as much in place in terms of what our plan would be. Should we be out 3 days? Should we be out 5 days? And we tried to anticipate as many different of those scenarios as we could. But after it happened, a lot of those plans went out the window because we didn't anticipate the severity of some of the things that occurred.
We get briefings from the National Weather Service in Mount Holly directed at emergency officials, and what I did was I pulled out some of the bullet points that I wanted to stress to everybody to know the severity of the storm. You could see that the first bullet point, they stated to us that the flooded record looks likely at Sandy Hook and north of Sandy's track with the pounding northeast flow. And we knew that we had a high likelihood of being north of Sandy's track. They were saying that they were looking at a 10.5 to 11.5 foot event there. We knew that corresponded for Manasquan, that corresponded to about a foot lower than that, about 9.5 to 10.5, which is the 1992 storm. The difference between 1992 and now is we had a lot more sand. We had the Army Corps beach nourishment in place, which provided a large beach berm, which is basically a storm damage reduction. It doesn't prevent flooding, it doesn't prevent the storm from impacting, but what it does is help to mitigate some of the damage from the wave action and the direct wave attack. So we knew we had that in place. We did not know how much that would affect the event, but we were hoping that we would be looking at slightly lesser event than 92 because of that protection. We went over the impact areas again just to have preparations in place, talk about our evacuations, what areas would be in the mandatory evacuation zone. And we just went down just a final, like some bullet points, what we had to get done. This is just more for reference for discussion topics. We had to get some of our emergency signs down. We also had pre-staged, we picked up a boat from the Belmar Marine Basin that gave us a rowboat to use in conjunction with our fire rescue boat. So we had multiple boats staged to respond for the storm. We had our OEM big truck on Main Street to help with our barricades for evacuations. This is some of the other bullet points, what we were doing, and I'll get into the exact evacuation methodology. We had notifications. This is Sunday morning. We had our evacuation sirens sounding beginning Sunday morning at 8 a.m. and we had them activated every every 4 hours. We had the police department scheduled to do a route alert at 1 p.m. on Sunday. Again, it's just to make sure that the public knows that we have evacuations in place and we're very serious about them. The more different ways we can notify the public, the better off we are. And I think that the more they realize how seriously we're taking this storm. The fire department was scheduled to do door-to-door evacuations on Sunday afternoon, beginning at 2 p.m. We had a variable message board that we had up announcing the evacuations. We also had set up a reception center for that Sunday morning for people to be able to come into, and once they evacuated their house, they'd be directed on where they could go for public sheltering. We had scheduled conference calls with the governor on Sunday, and we also began staffing the command center 24/7 beginning Sunday evening. Or not only knocking on the doors and telling folks that they're in an evacuation area, but we actually had a evacuation order that was pre-printed where they had to list their name and address if they were planning on riding the storm out, so we could make sure that we had accountability of these people that were intending to ride the storm out. Again, we wanted to make sure we got the message out. We wanted to make sure that the message was worded appropriate and that the residents in this town knew that this was a very, very, very serious, life-threatening, live or die situation.
All right, we have a team that meets for emergency management. When we have a severe weather or severe emergency, emergency management declares a state of emergency. They take over the town. They have more authority than me as mayor or as the police chief But we have set up a command center in Borough Hall. We have a generator to back it up. In it we have the 2 emergency management guys. What we like to do is keep one in the building and one out in the field. We have the police chief or the captain of the police 24 hours a day with us, one or the other, and he can direct his people as the emergency management director sees fit. They have the first aid is there 24 hours a day. They have somebody there. DPW has somebody there because as trees come down, all the calls storm related would come to the war room. The war room would disperse the DPW to go and take care of the tree, cut it, swing it out of the way to keep the roads open, stuff like that. The mayor and council, the mayor would be there 24 hours a day. Councilmen would pop in and out offering help. The borough clerk was there 24 hours a day in case anything we had to do legally on her end. The town administrator, he was there 24 hours a day. And we went in on Monday morning and didn't leave to go home till Wednesday afternoon.
Once Monday morning came upon us, again, the morning high tide, we were locked down in the Emergency Operations Center. So all my information is either coming in electronically or via reports from field units. The information that we were getting is that we had significant flooding down here on the beachfront. We knew the winds were just incredible. We were under a massive onshore wind that weren't going to stop. And we knew Monday morning that we had 12 hours until that Monday night high tide. We knew it was going to be bad. We organized all the department heads again like we had done in the previous days leading up to the storm. In the Emergency Operations Center at Borough Hall on the 2nd floor Monday morning. Everybody was kind of in a lockdown and a response mode. Fire department was responding to reports of wires down, alarms going off, trees down, trees on houses. Police and first aid were responding to those calls as well as also dealing with traffic issues. And we knew we had an extremely small window to get people out on Monday because we had a high tide Monday morning and we had a high tide Monday night, and you had about a 3-hour window where the tide was going to recede enough to just be able to cross these bridges and get down here or to get people out. This is an extremely dangerous, life-threatening storm. If you're in an evacuation area, do not try and ride this one out. Manasquan will experience flooding exceeding all previous storms, and emergency services will be cut off from evacuation zones later today.
Of all the storms I went through, the March storm in '62 was the first bad one that I can remember. We used to send one fire truck from each company and the ambulance down to the Coast Guard station. And we'd go up in the tower, we'd bring some hot dogs and beans and sit out a high tide down there. And we'd go up in the tower and I saw a house collapse for the first time in my life from the waves hitting it and hitting it. It's rocking, then it just collapsed on the north end. Then the next really bad one was in the '80s. I can't remember then. But the worst one up till Sandy was 92 as far as water. We've been through more with heavier winds, and many of them heavier winds than what Sandy was. Sandy's wind was only high for about an hour, hour and a half, and it only topped out at about 80 miles an hour. Irene, it was just as windy, but not as water. The only fortunate thing with Sandy is we didn't get the heavy rains. If we had gotten the heavy rains they were predicting, we would have been in worse shape than we were from the tidal in the storm. But Sandy is the all-time high for water, but not the all-time high for wind.
So we made one final push. We put every emergency vehicle that we had in town on the road on Monday. As soon as that tide receded, late Monday morning, they went over the bridges. Last chance to get everybody out. Last chance for people to know how serious we meant every warning and evacuation order that we gave. I think that this barrage that we did on Monday, without a doubt, saved lives. As that storm ramped up on Monday, we began just basically, we were in a hunker down. We were responding to calls as they came in. We had the fire chief, the EMS captain, police chief, all up in the operations center. As soon as we'd get a call, we'd dispatch the appropriate units. At one point during the storm, I got an emergency call on the radio. They said, "You got to get back here ASAP. We're evacuating Borough Hall." I was pulling into the parking lot and I just saw the mayor, our administrator, our other OEM coordinator, Dave Kircher, running out of the Borough Hall with laptops and equipment in their hands. One of the main power lines running down Main Street, the pole had snapped and was dangling inches from the building. And if it had made contact with the building and those primary wires were juiced, you would have had an instantaneous fire and potentially electrocution hazard for everybody in that area. Racing in my head, all right, we have to come up with a fallback location. We knew that one of the local firehouses in the plaza, #1 firehouse, had a nice area that we could set up. It had a radio, it had a big screen where we had a projection, so we could put up all the information that was coming into us, put it up on a screen so everybody in the room could see what we were looking at and discuss. And we had radio comms with all the emergency services.
First came up, it was just seeping in a little. So I foolishly had a sponge mop, and I was sponging it up and figured we'll keep up with it because it wasn't coming in very fast. The tape held. And we also have a 4-foot crawl space underneath, and there's a trap door over here. So we figured any extra water will just scoot down the trap door. But it soon became evident when Jack opened the trap door, the 4 feet of water was already in the base of the house. And once it got up to the walls, the water came in from everywhere. The creek was coming in the back door, and the ocean was coming in the front door. And when it got to be about 5-6 inches high, we retreated.
We knew we'd had it, so we went upstairs and got ready for bed. We lost power only about, I would say, 9 o'clock that evening.
Right.
But we had prepared some candles by that time, and we went to bed.
At this point is when the peak of the storm started coming in. We're starting to get into later on Monday. At this point, we're also, obviously we're inundated with calls for power lines down, trees into houses. If it wasn't a life safety issue, we weren't sending units out. At this point, JCP&L had already de-energized the grid, so the power lines that were down, thankfully, were not energized. We started getting calls for water evacuations. We activated our high water rescue teams. We were fortunate enough, step back a couple years, back in 2006, we procured 2 surplus military vehicles. We spent a lot of time, we got them through the federal surplus property program at no cost. Spent a lot of time retrofitting the vehicles to customize them so they'd be able to be used for an incident like this, a worst case scenario. Fortunately, we had these vehicles outfitted with proper communications and warning systems and ladder systems, and we deployed those units. 1 from each firehouse. They are staffed by several firefighters that were water rescue trained, as well as a first aider that would be able to provide first responder emergency medical care if need be. We knew certain areas the water was actually getting too deep for these vehicles to be operating. At this point, now we start looking at deploying water assets. We had our Manasquan fireboat, which is a smaller rigid hull inflatable boat. It was manned by 2 firefighters, and they were able to get into certain areas as calls came into us at the Emergency Operations Center. We would radio out the location. The boat would go in, they would make their pick, remove whoever needed to be removed, bring them back to the high water rescue vehicles that were waiting in water, but shallower water where they could bring the people up into the back of the truck. As soon as night fell on Monday night is really when the peak of the storm was occurring, obviously. And what we did is we had a overhead projector that we would log the call in, location of the call, type of call, whether it was a welfare check, it was actual rescue, number of people involved, and we'd assign a unit. We had our 2 land-based units, which were our high water vehicles. We had 2 water units. One was the Manasquan District Fireboat, which had water rescue trained personnel on it, as well as a small rental boat that we had pre-staged from the Borough of Belmar, from the Marine Basin there, had loaned us out a boat, and we had first aiders assigned to that. We were in contact. I know the fire chief was in direct contact with his line officers, and we are assessing the conditions minute by minute, hour by hour, to make sure that those personnel operating out there, that they were comfortable and they wanted to continue the mission.
Irene was a pretty good dry run for what we wound up doing. You know, OEM had bought those big deuce and a halves. We hadn't used them before in that type of setting or that type of atmosphere. And we wound up doing a little patrolling in those during Irene. We caught a fire on Borough Road during Irene. So we had a sense of awareness, you know, almost a year to that month of what we'd be facing with a big storm.
We were fortunate to have the experience and the training of the first responders, that they were comfortable being out there. I'm sure it must have been extremely scary, because when I stepped outside, it was just an unbelievable feeling. And I'm on dry land. I can imagine what these rescuers, you know, being chest deep or not even able to touch the ground in some locations, in pitch black, with trees coming down all around them, you know, hurricane winds. It must have been an unbelievable experience. They really, really stepped up, and they made it happen for the town. I mean, essentially, that's when everything comes to fruition. That's when you prove yourself as an emergency responder. They took the training that they had, the experience they had, and the confidence in themselves, and the courage to be able to go out there and operate in those conditions.
But what got me was we had gone down to the inlet that morning, or that afternoon at low tide. The gazebo was gone, the boardwalk was gone, the landing there was gone, and that wasn't the bad high tide. And even at dead low tide, the waves were breaking where the gazebo would have been and rolling down Riverside Drive. So I remember getting on the phone and calling home and telling my family that, you know, this was going to be bad. This was going to be really bad.
Many of the towns pulled the plug and didn't even respond to some of these calls during the height of the storm. But we're very grateful. I don't know how many lives saved, but they must have pulled out during that storm several truckloads of people, and we were fitting people. We were making sure the trucks were full before they even brought them up onto dry land. So, you know, it had to be in excess of 100 residents were pulled out.
And we were being dispatched from the command center at Borough Hall by the police and OEM. And we would get an address. We would try to make it to that address as quickly as possible. In some cases, people were home. In some cases, they weren't. We would go door to door. As the night went on, it went from maybe thigh-high water to waist-high water to just before we got pulled off the road, it was shoulder-high. And you know, we'd go into a house where no one would answer. We'd search as best we could, and then clear it and make sure nobody was there. We would clear cars and then get out. If they were home, early on at night, we'd walk them to the truck and take them to the staging area at the train station, the old train station, and they would be taken to a shelter. As the night went on, we had to use boats. The first aid brought boats. There was a fire department boat. and we would transfer them from their front door to a boat, then back to the deuce and a halfs, and then transfer them to the staging area. But as the night went on, the one thing that struck me was Irene, to me, was a flood where the water came high and it was like a bathtub where you were standing in it. It was like standing in a pool. This was different. When you hit a cross street that went east and west, the water was moving and it was hard to keep your feet. It was pushing. And there was a lot of objects and debris in the water, everything from telephone poles to refrigerators. We didn't see it, our driver did, and thank God he saw it. We had a shed pass us on Pine Avenue and McClellan, which is, that's west of Potter. And the other thing I remember was early on, when trees fell or branches fell, you could hear them and it was disconcerting. But by the time we were finishing up, it just became background noise because it was so constant. All you heard was trees and branches falling, and the wind sounded like a train. It was unbelievable. But at the same time, we were so busy, you just didn't have time to think about anything else that you were doing, and no one was panicky. No one was, it was inspiring, actually. It was good to be a part of. It was an experience I'll never forget.
All in all, the job got done. It got done well. There was not one life safety call that came in that we didn't respond to, not one. Again, that falls on the courage and the bravery and the conviction of our emergency responders, the firefighters and EMS personnel that put their lives on the line, and police officers also that were out there and fulfilled the duties. You could tell the storm was subsiding because not so much by the wind. I mean, you could tell the wind was taking a different turn. It was still howling, but the call volume started dropping. At some point, probably around 11 o'clock, the call volume began to decrease. We had units freed up. Guys were coming in for some R&R to swap out, to get dry gear, get refreshments, and the storm now was inland. The winds were howling out of the south. Our main concern now was, what are we left with? We got everybody out that needed to get out. We hope we averted life safety issues, but what do we have? How bad is it? I had no idea. The nearest tide gauge at Sandy Hook was blown out before the tide came in, so I had no idea how high the tides had hit. I knew we definitely were looking at a 92 event at a minimum. This time we had the beach nourishment. We had a lot more sand on the beach. Certainly it had eroded in the last 15, 16 years, but we still had protections that we didn't have in 92, so I didn't know what we were looking at. Are we going to look at it, go down the beach? Are we going to see another 92 storm? Are we going to go down and just see a lot of high water lines, some flooded houses, but no wave destruction, direct wave attack on the beach? I just didn't know. So what we did was we planned, we got basically all the department heads. We jumped in one of the trucks that was available, one of our military trucks, and about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, we felt that we would be able to make it down here, that the tides would have receded as much to let us get down here. We grabbed a couple flashlights and hopped in and took a ride down and just came up on a scene of utter devastation. Pulled up to the beachfront there, and it was just unrecognizable. It looked like you were in the middle of the worst blizzard you'd ever seen, but instead of snow drifts, it was all sand. And you could see just chunks of the macadam up on the beach walk, displaced and strewn around. We got up on the beach, and everybody's reaction was the same, whether you were a lifelong resident of the town, whether you're 60 years old or my age. Our jaws dropped, and we just couldn't believe it. Everybody was literally speechless and just walking around. It was like walking on a foreign planet, like being on the face of Mars, walking around with a flashlight. You could barely see. The wind was blowing probably a solid 55, 60 miles an hour. It was just, between the sand and whatnot, you were trying to make out what we really had on our hands. Couldn't even drive the trucks down First Avenue. We'd have to fall back to Second Ave or Third Avenue. and make our way up each beach entrance because of the sand. We couldn't get through it. And each spot that we went further and further south, the devastation started just getting worse and worse. When we rolled up on Main Street and saw Gigi's, we saw the flood waters that had broken into the Osprey. Gigi's was unrecognizable.
Going up to the beach every hour, watching it slowly. I was basically 2 houses north of Pike Avenue Beach entrance, which was formerly Dead Man's Beach when I grew up. The dunes started slowly deteriorating at the gateways. They started getting wider and wider. By 12 o'clock, it was starting to breach the top of the dunes and just pulling it apart. About 1 o'clock in the morning is pretty much when everything hit the proverbial fan. The dunes just started disintegrating.
We were blown away. We knew we had some extensive structural damage, especially in the south end of town. A lot of the houses there, we just knew were going to be, if they weren't already demolished, they would be. So at this point, we had a good grasp of the devastation. We had a good grasp of how high the tides got. And I just prayed to myself that nobody was killed, that nobody rode the storm out, wasn't able to call. And when the floods came in, they either drowned in their house or had to evacuate the house and were swept out to sea. I truly prayed because I knew that we had just gone through something that the town of Manasquan has never seen ever before.
Robert and Jean Bedard of First Avenue had their home rebuilt to Florida's Dade County hurricane specifications, including the location of all power equipment, especially a gas generator, on the 3rd floor. The gas generator, through a quirk of the way it was hooked into New Jersey natural gas, continued to work 24/7 following the storm. Robert Bedard.
It got kind of windy. I've got one of those little whirly things up on my 3rd floor also. And I was able to record the peak gust of around 65 miles an hour. But we had some pretty steady wind up in that vicinity for some period of time too. So it got windy, and the house, you could feel the vibration in the house from the wind blowing and everything.
Certain positions down here on the beachfront, like we thought, would not have been survivable. What we did was we headed back to the command center. We debriefed everybody on what we saw. We told anybody that was still left there, we said, listen, get home, get some sleep, get a couple hours in, because as soon as day breaks, we're going to be going hard to work. We got a major recovery operation, a major search and rescue operation to take place the following morning. We had a lot of work cut out for us. From an emergency management standpoint, our main concerns obviously were getting out anybody that survived, getting a tally of damages, getting an idea if anybody was missing. What we did was we took those 150 waivers that residents had signed that said they were going to stay and ride the storm out, and we entered each building and searched to make sure that they hadn't rode the storm out. Fortunately, all those searches came up negative. We also had some reporting in of some people that had called in and said that they had evacuated and whatnot. But now we had another major consideration, and we have over half the town is not destroyed but significantly damaged, unsecured. It's unsafe to enter. We can't let residents in. They want to go in. We have power lines down. JCP&L is slowly re-energizing grids. We have severed gas mains that all they need is accumulation of gas around them and a spark to have a major explosion or a series of fires. So we knew we needed to isolate the areas. We started at the railroad tracks. We only let residents in beyond that point. We called in the National Guard. We were fortunate to have some contacts that we'd made previous with state officials that expedited the dispatching of approximately 50, 60 troops that were stationed throughout Manasquan. And we had, due to the extensive damage on the beachfront, we had absolutely no access area beyond the bridges. Again, now we're still in the re-entry phase. Our highest priority was to get people back, to see the damage in their homes, to start working on their homes, but making sure that we do so in a safe manner, because you can't have people going into areas that have energized wires on the ground.
That was, what, a week? It was a good week. I don't remember exactly, but not until we had to get a pass in Manasquan to be able to come down to the beach area to see our home. So it was like almost 7 days, if not more, before we were allowed to come back in. Because I checked every day. I used to go to the Manasquan Borough Hall and, you know, ask them. I always met my neighbors there, you know, to see if when we could go back in, because they never could tell you ahead of time, really. That you had to check in, and so.
You know, it's a dangerous situation, and it was handled extremely well, you know, we thought.
And the community that day, when we were waiting online to come down and get the pass to the beachfront, there were like restaurants and sweet tea on Main Street, like they were giving away, it was kind of cold, so they were giving away hot coffee, hot tea, food, all like gloves and
passing
blankets
out sandwiches and coffee online.
It was incredible. Like I said, I've always wanted to live here year round, but seeing that community pull together the way that it did, and high school students volunteering, it was really nice.
Yeah.
Really, the entire beachfront, there was nothing but downed wires everywhere. It took a long time. We had no power on the beachfront, I would say probably 6 weeks at least, maybe even longer, certain areas, and we systematically went grid by grid. JCP&L would dispatch their trucks to a gridded location, which is, let's say, for instance, a 4-block by 4-block area, and re-energize that circuit, and we'd go circuit by circuit, restoring power to the town. Once we got the power back on, the line secured, we'd allow entry into the area.
You know, the one thing that I just want to say was that, you know, they did a wonderful job of controlling access to the beach area. And it was really pretty incredible to be coming through those checkpoints with the National Guard, and especially at nighttime. After, I mean, they did have a curfew at night, but once we were able to get back in our home, we could, if we were out to dinner, we could come in late. Do you know what I mean? We couldn't be out on the roads, but we were able to come in. And it was such an experience to drive up Main Street, and just before you get to the bridge, you know, have these huge lights and have the National Guard and a Manasquan police woman or man with the National Guard there checking us out. And it got so you got to know these people. We heard that one of the gentlemen who lives up here on the beachfront, he actually had some of the National Guard. They were going off duty. He had them come to his house for Thanksgiving. He was in his home then, so he had them come over for a little Thanksgiving celebration at his house. And you know.
Then that next day, that was Tuesday morning, we walked out and we walked up from 2nd Avenue to 1st Avenue. We saw the beach dunes, which were now occupying 1st Avenue. They were about 5 or 6 feet high. And we walked up onto the beach, and I was exhilarated because I saw the ocean the way I knew it when I was growing up. The North End beach, the sand was white, the jetties were wooden, and the beach was absolutely, the ocean was absolutely beautiful. And I have to say, it was an exhilarating experience I never thought I would see again.
We came to the school just as a meeting place, and it was amazing to see how many staff and how many kids were already here. That it just seemed almost instinctual, you know, when people couldn't communicate and maybe didn't, people just showed up, and that was something I think that really began to again bring us together and start to assess where we were as a community. And I remember the first person that I saw coming up was in the circle was Mr. Gordon, who was out there with food and, you know, delivering food to cars, and it was just it was very comforting to see staff members and our kids working together and trying to figure out where we were.
The first thing that hit you was just, other than the destruction, was the amount of sand. You know, it was 5 feet high in some places on First Avenue, down the side streets. And I remember thinking, how are we ever going to move this? How would a person get back into their house? And I don't know what day it was, whether it was that day or the following day. I had mentioned to Chris Tucker that, you're going to need labor down here at some point. I knew football wouldn't even be a thought for most kids for a while, but I knew I had a couple dozen kids who were strong and would probably be looking to get out of the house and do something. So I just asked him, I said, Chris, you get us in the game. And it was a couple days after that when we had secured the beachfront and they were relatively certain that nobody would be put in harm's way, that he called me up and he said, hey, if that offer still stands. We were meeting and practicing here for the first day. It was the Monday following the storm. And I left it up to them. I said, I knew a lot of them didn't have homes to go home to. Most of them wouldn't have a warm shower to go home to. Or anything to eat at that point. I just left it up to them. I said, we have a lady who needs to be dug out of her house down on the beachfront, and we were asked to go by OEM. You can vote on it, and we'll go. And we'll bring a truck for you, and we'll drive you down. And they voted unanimously to go. And I think I had maybe 60 kids at that point, and they all went. And we went down there at about 3. And we dug until well after dark. We didn't have any shovels. We took them out of the garages, the ones we could find. We maybe had 3, but they were great. They found flower pots, garbage cans, planters, pieces of wood, plywood, and they dug a path from the street to this woman's home through, in some places, 4 or 5 feet of sand, and cleared it all the way up to her house. They were smiling and laughing and having a blast. But we were all covered in sweat. And I told them that, Chris came down and he said, hey, if you're not doing anything tomorrow, we need you tomorrow. So I told them right then and there, if you want to come back down, we're going to be here tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning. And we're going to have at it again. And we went down there with members, actually, of the girls' basketball team. And Wall had brought some students. And our team dug from Main Street to the Army camp. Had dug people out of their homes, and that's got to be a half a mile, and I don't know how many tons of sand we moved, but it was inspiring. It was something else.
And one thing that happened during our stay was that I had run out of a medication that I had to have every day. And so I went and asked for a permit to go to the drugstore to get it refilled and come back. And I was told that if I went, I would not be allowed back. And was told that the only way to get it would be to have someone bring it. So I called Campbell's Pharmacy, and although they were swamped, they were very kind about it and considerate, and they said they would send me a week's supply because they were short on the same medicine themselves. When they called me, they said they were coming. I went up on the bridge and up by the yellow tape, and
that was the Ocean Avenue Bridge.
Ocean Avenue Bridge had a yellow tape across it, which we weren't allowed to cross. And as the man approached, apparently he had to walk the last couple of blocks. I went crossed over the yellow line to go and save him a few steps, and I was told to get back over the yellow tape that I wasn't allowed to go and even meet the man. So of course I said, well, I don't think it's any less safe on either side of the tape, but nevertheless that was it.
Between the Manasquan police, the OEM, the fire department, the state police, I don't want to leave out Mercer County Sheriff's Department because they were patrolling this particular area, who also ran to town and got a prescription for me and brought it back because I was running low on one of my medicines, and he said, just call it in, prepay it. Here's my personal cell phone number. When it's ready, call me. He says, I'll pick it up and I'll ring it out to you. And he did. And they were fantastic and fabulous. As far as I'm concerned, you could not have asked for a better group of people. The Army Reserve was here. The National Guard was here. They were all over looking out for us. I got to know a lot of the guys because I would be out there after midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, still hosing out the garage, hosing off the stuff I moved out of the garage. They'd stop, hey, how you doing? You need anything? You're all right?
But my kids, when we bought this property, they said, after Hurricane Sandy, my oldest son said, well, are you ready to move now, Mom? I said, no, I've dreamt about this my whole life. I'm where I want to be for the rest of my life. And he said, but Mom, he said, do you want to go through this again at your age? And I said, well, hopefully this was a 100-year storm and I won't be here for the next one, so I'm not leaving. That'll be your worry.
I want to say there were 40 families at one point that we knew were out of their homes. We were never quite sure about where some of those families were. Sometimes kids came down and said, well, we're fine. We found out otherwise that they needed things. We also found out that some families had been separated, that you had brothers and sisters living in different places. So that was something that was difficult. So we spent the better part of that week going through those needs assessments and figuring out where we could best serve.
In fact, one of the memories I'll never forget was I had gone home the night after the storm at about 4 in the morning. And I think I slept for about 2 hours. And I knew I had to be back at the firehouse for that day's duties. And as I was coming out of the house, I saw Chris Klodowski, a young sophomore who played for us, standing right in front of my walkway with a plastic garbage bag. And he caught me by surprise. I'd never seen him in our neighborhood. And I said, Chris, what are you doing? And he smiled. And he said, hey, Coach, good morning. How are you? I said, I'm doing great. What are you doing here? And he said, our house got destroyed. I'm staying with the Muirs, who are our next door neighbors. And in that garbage bag, he had what he could grab before he got out of the house with his family. And even his family, they all couldn't stay in the one spot. They were kind of split up and spread out, his brothers and sisters and he, all over the place. But he came to every practice. He didn't miss one. He was smiling. He helped us dig every day that we dug. He did everything that we asked. And I know I'm singling him out, but there were 4 or 5 kids like that who they never said boo, and you'd never know. Zach Campbell had been forced out of his house, but you'd never know it. You'd thought he was going about his everyday business, and he was helping other kids get through it, and he was digging every day. Connor Grogan, Chris Miller, Jerry Taylor, Doug Wells. There's a dozen of them, and I remember thinking, I'll never complain about anything ever again. It was amazing. It was truly amazing.
Community. And what was very interesting about this is I got a call from a number of high schools, one down in Atlanta, Georgia, 2 schools, Whippany Park and Hanover Park High School in North Jersey, that decided to adopt us. And what was neat was they dedicated their first basketball game to us. Everyone wore blue that night, and all this was going on while we were still in recovery, so we were kind of aware but not really aware. By the time we got back to school and we connected with that other school, we saw some of the pictures of what they did. Some of them some schools sent videos like "Hang in there." That was one of the things that was shown at Life is Good Day. But what was really a nice culmination is in the spring, the students from Hanover Park and Whippany Park came down and presented us with gifts and a check. And what I think it was important for our kids was they were on the receiving end of the kind of help that they always give. It meant a lot to all 3 schools. It was nice.
The couple days after were totally surreal. It got extremely cold, which we didn't have to worry about after Irene, so battling the cold was hard. It was an extra burden. It was hard to go anywhere. There were no traffic lights. We didn't know what the road conditions were. We were so thankful to all be together, to all be safe. we just felt like if we were together, we could get through anything. And that next week was pretty much survival. We would spend the day getting firewood and cooking our food and making sure nothing's spoiled. I think if you look at the ocean and you try and take away all the man-made things that are around us, I like to think it's as breathtaking now as it was 100 years ago, and I think it'll be this way 100 years from now. And I think that's the best source of hope that we can all get, and that we'll all be okay in the end.
And then, of course, it was that following day we had that nor'easter come in and dump, 4 or 5 inches of snow on us. And we had made the joke that Monday night that we would never complain about shoveling snow again because the sand was so heavy. And sure enough, when Thursday came around, we told them, hey, if you want to play a football game on Saturday, we're going to have to shovel this field all by ourselves because nobody's going to do it. And I'll be damned if they weren't leaping into the idea. And at first, they didn't believe we could do it. No one did, because it started out one shovel, and you're looking at the football field, and then there's another shovel, and you're thinking, we'll never do this. But we were there till well after dark that night, and then the following day, and we cleared it. But the problem was there was inches of standing water on the field. So that Friday afternoon, we actually had parents come. Mr. Clayton brought a small bulldozer. People brought in propane jets to dry the field. We came in Saturday morning. The field looked awful. We knew it would need hours of work. We couldn't have the kids do it, so the coaching staff went out. And then sure enough, Mr. Calley, Mr. Clayton showed up. Then off-duty policemen showed up. Off-duty firemen showed up. The mayor showed up. We had 2 Board of Ed members show up, and we're all ankle deep in mud trying to get the field ready. And I remember Mr. Mahan coming out at 8 o'clock in the morning saying, I don't think we can play. And we begged him for the chance. We begged him for the opportunity, and he was great. He said, I don't agree with this, but if you think we can play, I'll be here on the fence cheering for you. And sure enough, when the game began and we were playing, he was standing on the fence line right next to Mr. Coppola and everybody else in 4 or 5 inches of mud, and we got it in. But to me, it was more about, it had nothing to do with football, and more about resiliency and determination, and really the spirit that I had seen from the town for a week, 2 weeks, all came together in one day, and was embodied by those kids. It's something I'll never forget.
And while there was talk of us moving the game to Rumson, who they have a turf field, which obviously would have been better, we wanted to have the game here. So through a great effort through our grounds guys and our team and everyone involved, we were able to get the field ready and played probably one of the most memorable games that that we played in many years. We pulled out a win late against Rumson, and very, very emotional. And of course that coincided with Jay Price, our football coach's involvement as a first responder, which between the win and his efforts, again, we received national attention and local attention for what we had gone through, and it was culminated in a guest appearance on NFL Films, the Inside the NFL, which is a weekly show on Showtime. But it was that was really an emotional time for everybody, and that was also a good way for us to lead into the next step, which was everybody returning to some kind of sense of normalcy and coming back and coming back to school after 2 weeks of tough times.
Today, the local area ministerium, although now housed in their own sanctuaries, are still partners in this town. Brothers in Christ since before the village became a town. The churches of Manasquan have risen above occasions of pain and despair throughout our history, all to provide Manasquan with a hand up, not a hand out. A place where people can come together, find clothing, food, friendship, and fellowship in their faith. After Sandy, it was no different. The churches opened their doors and their hearts to those in need. Reverend Joe Gretzel of the First Baptist Church.
On Wednesday morning, after the storm, Elliot Correa, the chief of police, gave me a call. And he said, "Joe, can you do me a big favor? I've got lots of people hanging around the lobby of the police station. Would you mind opening up the doors of your church so that people have someplace to go?" And that began a saga that carried on for about 7 or 8 weeks, where First Baptist Church was involved in Sandy recovery. Saturday after the storm, a group of folks decided to have a clothing drive to help storm victims, except they didn't have a plan for what to do with all the clothing. So they called up, and my wife said, "Sure, bring the clothes over to First Baptist Church." And so they brought the clothes over to First Baptist, and pretty soon they filled our gym and our Sunday school classrooms and the garages at Neary's Funeral Home and the basement level of Neary's Funeral Home. And so we called over to Pastor Reggie and said, "Pastor Reggie, do you need some clothes to help people with Sandy recovery?" And she said, "Sure." So pretty soon we filled her fellowship hall and her gym and piles in the pews in her sanctuary. And that's how we all got into the clothing distribution business. Pretty early on, realized that it was silly for us to duplicate our efforts. So what we did is each church sort of took on a responsibility that fit what it was able to do. We were initially open 24 hours a day, and so if folks needed a place to come late at night or a place to stay overnight, we provided that. And we were the church that got charged with doing the breakfasts. Pastor Reggie and the folks over at Manasquan United Methodist Church took responsibility for dinners, and by February had served 16,000 dinners and still counting, because they're still doing dinners on Saturday and Sunday nights. The Presbyterian Church had already housed the community food pantry, so all food donations went over to the Presbyterian Church, and they agreed to set up pretty quickly a way to organize the volunteers. So as folks were calling all of the different churches offering to come in and volunteer to help mud out houses or move furniture or whatever needed to be done, we would refer them down to the Sandy Relief folks at First Presbyterian Church. The other aspect that was left was getting lunches out to people who were working out in the field, and so we divided up the community into quadrants, and the folks that were working out of the Elks with You Cannot Be Replaced and Squan Strong, they had one section of town. Manasquan United Methodist Church had another section of town, and First Baptist Church had the beachfront section. So every day in the morning we'd load up a truck with coffee and coffee cups and hot chocolate and snacks, and we'd go out first thing in the morning and bring out hot drinks and snacks. And by lunchtime we'd send around sandwiches and more hot drinks and bottled water. And in the afternoon, we'd make another run with some hot drinks just to warm people up. Most days, we had a second truck that would follow the lunch truck, if you will, and that truck had shovels and gloves and garbage bags and masks and any kind of cleaning supplies that folks might need, and we would just distribute them to folks as they needed them. As the first week and on into the second week progressed, and as people were able to get back into their homes and start cleaning up, we had donations really coming in from literally all around the Northeast, corporate donations from folks like CVS and Lysol. Red Cross was here several times per week with donations. Churches from around the tri-state area would call up and say, what can we bring that would be helpful? And so as the trucks would pull up in our driveway, we had tables set up right at the curb, and we would put the supplies right out there on the curb as folks drove up, and we'd say, what do you need? And they'd say, can we have some trash bags? And we'd load them up with contractor bags, whatever they need. And folks just kept coming for weeks and weeks after the storm. Every day, people from the community, people from out of the area would just show up and say, what can we do to help? And it was really wonderful. People would bring in lunches, people would bring hot foods in. We had 3 weekends in a row. We had a group that came from Pennsylvania. Don't know where they came from. One of them used to summer in Manasquan, and so she had a heart for Manasquan. So she organized a bunch of her friends from her church, and for 3 weeks in a row, they brought 10 or 15 full trays of hot food that we could serve out for folks as they came in. It was wonderful. The churches, I think one of the things, when folks have asked me how it was that the churches were able to respond to this crisis so well, one of the things that I think is important is that we, first of all, the pastors are really genuinely friends. I count as, among the pastors in our community, some of my best friends. And so we're very, very comfortable with each other. There's no sense of competition among the churches. There's no sense of one-upsmanship. There's the denominational lines really don't stand between us. And so we're really very able to work together. And it became apparent pretty early on that a lot of the recovery work was going to center here on South Street because of the proximity of the three churches. So the other churches, rather than opening up and trying to duplicate what we were doing, just came right alongside and helped us as best they could. Even St. Denis, with all the damage that they sustained, as soon as they were able to get on their feet, they began doing distribution and supporting the work that we were all doing together. So I think that community element of the churches having been involved in previous community crises, we really already sort of had the mechanism in place to work together. Pretty early in the recovery process, pulled together a workshop with FEMA, insurance experts, mold experts, construction experts, folks from the Red Cross, Catholic Charities, counseling folks, and we were able to pull together a big team and host a night over at First Presbyterian Church where each of those different groups had an opportunity to address the whole crowd, and then we divided everybody up into breakout groups so that people could go from room to room to room and be able to get their questions answered. So the evening started at about 5 o'clock, and folks were still wandering from room to room to get all their questions answered at about 8:30 that night. And when we had response and feedback from the different people that attended as experts, they had not been to a workshop like that at all in the Sandy process. And I think it became a model for some other groups to be able to offer something like that.
We're glad that you're here this evening. Just want to, thank you all for being here. I want to remind you that we're in church, and and I also want to just ask our host pastor this evening, Reverend Rob Morrison, to just ask a prayer for the evening's proceedings.
I'm Rob Morrison, pastor at the First Presbyterian Church here, and I just want to say we're very, very grateful for all of you to be here, grateful for our speakers. It's really a necessity for us to work together, and I'm really proud of all the ministers and all the leaders in the community who are here. Thank you very much.
I'm Reggie Albert. I'm from the Methodist Church. The help centers were initiated by the OEM group, and we started with the Baptists doing breakfast in the morning, the Methodists doing dinners. The Presbyterians were housed the pantry as always here and coordinated our volunteer efforts. All the other churches played in. Everybody was involved. People from all over the country have sent us truckloads of things. Your neighbors from everywhere have come together. Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts have brought us things. And I really need your help because I need to get my church back. So come. This is not a handout. This is a hand up. It's a hand up. And people, we need to learn to receive the gifts that have been sent our way. People were blessed and encouraged by being able to help each and every one of you. So please come. Please don't be shy. Please don't let your pride stand in the way. Please let us walk alongside you with all these good things that we have to offer.
Mayor Dempsey's here. I'm Joe DiOrio. I'm the administrator for the Borough of Manasquan. I want to introduce Mayor Dempsey. Raise your hand, Mayor, as well as... my point tonight is in order to communicate with your local officials and with your local government, it's extremely important to stay in tune to our website. That's www.manasquan-nj.com. If you forget it and don't write it down correctly, you can do a simple web search between our website, our Facebook page, and our Twitter page. you'll be up to date on all matters that pertain to the storm recovery. We've been very good about communicating as much as we can with you, and please, if there's a question, do not hesitate to reach out to us.
I do want to mention another partner that has been working in our community and continues to work in our community, and that's the wonderful folks at Swan Strong. They have been doing the same kinds of things the churches have been doing. Let's hear it for Swan Strong.
As the recovery process started to wind down, and as folks started settling into either back into their homes or more often into a temporary place, Christmas was right around the corner. And so Pastor Reggie over at Manasquan United Methodist Church put together a night of Christmas shopping. So all of the churches that had received donations and gift cards and materials, we all pooled what we had and the best of it that we had, and we set up a little shopping center over at Manasquan United Methodist Church. And by invitation through the community and through the ministerium and through the churches, we invited people to come shopping at this night. There was an educational foundation from New Brunswick that gave out 200 $100 gift cards the first night, $20,000 worth of gifts to Sandy-affected families. And then someone with a great sense of humor found red and white net big laundry bags like you'd send your kids off to college with, and we gave those to each person who came in to do their Christmas shopping. And so at the end of the day, as people left the Methodist Church, they had great big Santa bags slung over their shoulder full of Christmas presents and practical things that they needed for their home, and it was really a wonderful event. And I think for a lot of people in our communities who are used to being on the giving end of helping other people, in part because of the relative affluence of our community, it was a real switch for them to be on the receiving end. And it took a little while for people to dive in and enjoy the experience. But once they did, I think they really came away feeling blessed to be a part of a community that responded in the way Manasquan did. We're committed to being in this for the long haul, for providing resources as we're able, space as we're able to help people in this long-term recovery process. And I think it's going to be, all the experts say this is going to be a 3 to 5 year thing, and we're in it for the long haul. Certainly, if you weren't directly impacted, it probably sounds like we're just beating a drum that doesn't need to be beat anymore. But for folks who are still not in their homes, folks who are a long way from ever getting home again, Sandy is very much a reality every day here 9 months later. And I think it will continue to be for many of those folks on into this year and probably into 2014. So we really need to stick with folks for the long haul, and I think we have the resources to do that. And that collegiality in the community was great. I think someday we should have just a big picnic and invite everybody to be a part of it and just celebrate who we are and the uniqueness of our town. It's been great.
For those of us who have spent summers in the cottages at the beach, you will certainly relate to Dr. Kent Mountford, who lost his family's bungalow in Sandy. Having lived in this cottage for an entire lifetime, Dr. Mountford speaks of the frustration and the history of his family's cottage, not unlike so many others. Dr. Kent Mountford.
And it was one of the oldest in Manasquan. It spent 112 years facing the sea with only minor damage, really. A piece of boardwalk came through the front once, but all the famous storms it survived, 33, 38, Carol, Hazel, the March 62 storm, and of course Irene just a year before this storm. It had been in our family for 90 years of those 112, and I've been in it since I was a baby in 1939. In the 1960s, I actually became a marine biologist by playing with a microscope that I bought when I came out of the Army, and sat in the cottage in front of the fireplace, taught myself what I needed to know to begin going to graduate school. The house is full of my memories. It's just complete from the word go. I have had shipwreck artifacts put in there. The family adventures are full of my own adventures and those of my family members. The living room ceiling above the actual living room, the boards actually had the hundreds of fingerprints from the guys who built it back in 1902, and their sweaty hands actually left these prints on the boards. We had a cavalry sword which hung over the fireplace. It was once the fire poker until I finally convinced my uncle that I should conserve it and save it. And the living space was just so warm and so comfortable. I had an architect actually come and look at the house once because he wanted to see if he could reproduce that. We were with the same insurance company since about 1960. That's over half a century. And they denied all claims. They walked away with not a single penny. And digging through the rubble, we salvaged an awful lot that we could carry away. Some of the things are here in the room with me. Unfortunately, the house is completely gone now. We had the remains demolished a few months ago. Stuff that we found really was some wonderful things. My father's old 100-year-old fishing pole was broken, but I was able to piece it back together and clean up the 100-year-old fishing reel that was on it, and that'll go in another house someday as we begin to try to rebuild what we're doing. I'll never forget the memories from this house. I could at any time say, well, there's a crooked board there, there's a tear in that screen, there's a crack in that window, the wavy glass is in the window that overlooks the First Avenue view. All those things will stay with me forever. None of the bureaucrats from the community have actually stepped forward to help us in any way with all this New Jersey strong and let's bring Manasquan back. We've got only roadblocks from zoning and essentially new rules for height and elevating the house. When you elevate the house, then you're too high to be on the beachfront. The number of obstructions are just really amazing. We're going to try to rebuild, but I don't know if we're going to succeed it or not. The cost is extremely high when you've got no insurance to back you up. All those premiums have really gone for nothing. I really didn't sleep a full night for 6 months after that storm. I woke up and lost weight and woke up at all hours of the morning worrying about the place and wondering, still having flashbacks about what it was like to be in the house. And I feel that I could walk into that building today and know exactly in the dark where everything was. It was devastating to us, and I think we're not alone in that misfortune. But perhaps there's a way around it. We'll find out.
The one little glitch, I will say, and I'm sure that Mayor Dempsey has heard this, and I may have even mentioned it to him, was just the getting the passes, the process of getting the passes to get into the beach area afterwards. You know, we had to go stand in line that day, and I understand exactly why they did it, and I don't have any problem with the thinking behind that, but it was a very cold day, and it was the first day that we were allowed to come back in, but you had to stop and you had to go to the DCI building to get a pass. And, you know, there were a lot of elderly people, and, you know, I think the town tried to do as good a job as they possibly could in terms of identifying who were going to be in the most, because when you came down here, there were levels of destruction even along the beachfront that were at different stages. So they were trying to make sure that the people who were in the most destroyed area, you know, that they were prepared for that and that you got the cards to go to the right place. But that was the one little area. So what the MBIA is now doing, we're trying to work with the OEM, with the blessing of the town also. But one of our trustees is actually working with the OEM commission, and they have already designed it. We've kind of gone through the basic design of getting passes for people who are property owners here, so that they will have them, and so that if this would ever happen again, they would not have to go stand in line to get a pass to come into the beach.
The stairs, I write a poem on my stairs in the front of my house. Every year I put wooden planks out with a poem on it in May, and I change it every May every year. And I started doing that in '91, I think. It was when I turned 40 and I bought the land. The American Timber Company sold the land, so to anybody who wanted to buy their land, and I wanted to stay, so that was my first poem. And I just wrote one ever since then, right up until now. So there's about 23 poems, I think. This is a poem that I wrote for the MBIA, Manasquan Beach Improvement Association, of which Mary Ryan is president. And we wanted to do something for the first responders. We thought about taking an ad out in the paper. We thought about presenting them a plaque. And we came up with this idea just to write them a nice little poem. And Mary did a wonderful job of framing them and presenting them at the annual MBIA meeting. And I think it was very well received, and I read it at that meeting. And this is for all the first responders and the Manasquan community that was just there for all of us who needed any kind of a helping hand, both before, during, and after Superstorm Sandy. And so to those first responders, I wrote, "Vulnerable lives shattered by storm, out of our realm of comfort and norm. In time of peril, facing the worst, our own community responded first. Manasquan experienced and personally witnessed a tremendous outreach of local assistance. Devastated then, now reinvented from those of us to whom you tended. Humbled and oh so grateful to be on the upswing of adversity. A heartfelt thank you for being there as you tirelessly kept us in your care. Be it a helping hand or soothing smile, you lightened our way for a while. Your gestures were genuine and our great reward, something we all can be working toward. Life offers a choice of paths to take. Yours was a positive difference to make. Aiding without thought to how bad it can be, perhaps driven by a spirit of humanity. Inspired to be involved you are, and part of our journey traveled thus far. Giving of yourself, responding to our need, thereby you are our heroes indeed."
People's reaction, you know, Manasquan is Manasquan. They all work together. Volunteers were coming out of the woodwork to help us any which way they could. Right after the storm, I came down, I guess it was maybe Wednesday morning, around 5 o'clock, to talk to the dispatcher. And there's a woman standing in the lobby there talking to dispatch, and he said, "Well, there's the mayor, talk to him." And it happens to be the woman that runs Firefly. She says, "Could you get me down to my house so that I can get some clothes?" I said, "Well, haven't you been?" She said, "No, I live on the beachfront." So I said, "All right, I'll make a deal with you. I'll take you down there in my truck. I'll get you as close as I can. I'll let you out. I'm going to drive over and check on my house. I'll be back in 15 minutes. You be ready or I'm leaving without you." And I come back in 15 minutes. She had 2 plastic bags full of clothes. Brought her back up, and she started feeding people as early as Tuesday, out on the curb, cooking meals, putting it out to anybody and everybody, free. And she did that well after her power was off and the food she would have lost. She continued to go out and buy more food and giving people meals. And then all the other restaurants joined in and started doing it.
I don't know whose idea it was, but I remember speaking to George. I said, you know, let's do it. Let's get you down there. I want to put your voice on the radio. And he's kind of reluctant. I said, listen, they need to hear somebody other than myself. They need, you know, and they need some words of encouragement. Let's get you down and do it. And he reluctantly agreed, and we came down here, completely dark, walk up the stairs of the Coast Guard station in the dark by flashlight. The AM radio is running off a Honda generator on the front porch. And we get up there, and he's got this little speech kind of scribbled down on a piece of paper. And we hook him up, and he's about to read it, and he doesn't really even look at it, and just kind of wings it. And it was great. It just hit home. It was perfect. I think it was what we needed to hear. I think it lifted spirits, and ever since that, it's known as George's Fireside Chat.
They were just heartfelt. Took a lot of kidding. They thought I was Franklin Roosevelt with his fireside chats, kidding me about it. I just thought people needed a little picker-up. I had one thing I want to tell you. I had a very unique experience about 10 days ago. Someone was in Borough Hall older than me. There's not too many people older than me. He said, "You're my Winston Churchill." He said, "You were the right guy for the job at the right time. That other mayors couldn't have done what you did."
Knowing George the way I do, and you talk about solid people, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who cares as much as he does with obvious passion about Manasquan than George. He grew, this is his town. But in remembering George during the storm, I don't know if he slept, because I'll be honest, I tried to get an hour or two a day. He was always awake. He was always there. He was at the firehouse. He was at Borough Hall. He was down at the beachfront. He was around 24 hours a day. I don't know if he, and I mean that sincerely, I don't know if George slept for days, but you wouldn't know it.
One thing we did was, within about a month after the storm, we pulled everybody together and said, what could we have done different? What resources could we have had in this town that would have made us better prepared for the next Hurricane Sandy? Fortunately, we had done a lot over the last couple of years to increase our readiness. We had some flood maps done up, so we had an idea of the inundation areas, what areas we had to evacuate. We had warning systems erected so we could get out public warnings to people. We had vehicles to get in to get people out. But we knew there were some deficiencies. There's things that we could have had that would have made us better prepared for the next storm. And we focused on our communication, working with a major project with the police and fire department and the dispatchers to increase redundancy so we don't lose communications. If one tower goes down, we can still communicate with each other, because during Hurricane Sandy, one thing we found was we lost everything. We lost power, we lost cell phones, we lost data, we lost literally everything other than radio communications. And the only thing the radios were operating off of were generators or batteries in vehicles or batteries on handhelds. That's all we had. And that's all we had for several days, in fact, weeks in some areas. So that's the backbone. We wanted to make sure for the next storm, we had that redundancy, we had that ability to communicate. We also implemented several other corrective actions. We've got some backup generator. Instead of using portable generators in certain locations, we have now fixed backup generators so we can have fallback locations for the government operations. We're increasing our public warning capabilities. We have new flood maps done up that give us precisely what areas are inundated for the next storm. And we're also increasing our response trucks and upgrading some equipment there for our water rescue team. So it's been a long road. The residents of this town have been fantastic. I think when we became burnt out from the ongoing work, I think looking around and seeing the devastation and seeing the spirits of the residents pick up and rebuild and reorganize, it gave us the wherewithal to keep going and keep pushing this recovery happen. And Manasquan will never be the same as it was prior to Sandy, without a doubt. But you know what? We're a strong community. Everybody survived. There's a lot of hardship, but I think the pulling together the residents and the neighbors and the communities and family members have made us come out, without a doubt, stronger than ever.
26 years have passed since Reverend Robert Wuchter, who, portraying the role of Manasquan in our historical pageant, said these words: "May the future generations of our fair borough look back to this night with reverence and with pride at what we, the people of 1987, have done here tonight. And today, 1 year after Sandy, may the generations of this fair borough look back to this time with reverence and pride at what we, the people of October 29th, 2012, have done."
Oh